Afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another Webinar Wednesday. If you don't know, we're going to give a little introductions here, talk a little bit about XenTegra, myself, and then hand it over to our good friends at KeepIt. We have Paul and Rick with us today. Really, Webinar Wednesdays give us the ability for XenTegra to spotlight and put some of our partners on center stage for you, so you can get an understanding and a little bit of a taste of what's out there of solutions our partners provide. What I will ask, though, is if you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the Q&A section. That allows for us to track those a little bit easier than versus just putting it into the chat. So if you could do that, greatly appreciate it. So a couple of things I want to hit here first is welcome back to the Work Has No Boundaries raffle that we have going on for your chance to win a brand new Ford Bronco. You'll see the QR code down here. There's my heads up on the top there. I'm starting to get this logistics down. It's only taken a year, but I'm getting there. So you got the QR code that will take you to the webpage. You'll be able to register to win a brand new Ford Bronco. There's some additional tasks and items that you'll have to cover that will fully fledged enter you into this drawing, but we can cover that in a couple of minutes. Also, for this webinar, we'll have a giveaway. There'll be a drawing after the webinar is completed, and you'll be notified by KeepIt for an Amazon gift card. So what I would suggest is participate, get involved, ask some questions, be active in this webinar. It's really here to share this knowledge with you. So if you got questions, please make sure you toss them out there, and we'll get those addressed for you. So if you're not sure who XenTegra is, or if you are, this is a repeat for you. So don't spoil any surprises for the others that don't know. With that said, we're a reseller, service provider, and we provide solutions as far as it relates to digital transformation. So our main area of focus is within this digital workspace. Within that arena where we have EUC solutions, all of your edge computing, your maintenance and your business continuity within these solutions, MDM solutions, security, networking, all of that is our umbrella. That's our sweet spot. That's where we excel, is in that digital workspace. We assist you with your business strategies and multi-year transitions, whether it be in the cloud, in your data centers, but we're here to advise and enable you with that transformation of your environment to be a better solution for your end users, which is ultimately who we're all trying to make successful in this. So we were founded 10 years ago this year was our anniversary. We were founded by Andy Whiteside, and again, down here underneath of me. He came as an SE from Citrix, where he saw a void within the industry. Really what was happening is there were ISVs, there were partners out there that had solutions, and they worked with people like us, professional service providers, and they would just come out one and done, do the project and move on to the next one. So what we saw is the industry really needed a growth and a community feel. And this starts with enablement. It starts with making sure that you understand what solutions are out there. It helps our partners. We advise them on how to communicate this to us to be able to help grow this entire ecosystem around these solutions to be able to better help each other. We're not a one and done type provider out there. We want to help you throughout all of your transitions. We are there to advise you within these projects that you're doing. We don't work in a vacuum. We work with your teams, and it's across the board. We have our professional services where we could do the projects. We also break down into our own hosting environment where we work within our own data centers that we have throughout the country to support your environments. We also have managed services solutions. And then we also have some additional services and value add services that we have around micro applications and other solutions that are out there. So really it's this entire umbrella, and we also grow that and help you with the transition to a public cloud strategy. So those are some things to look at there as you're going through what can happen, or what do I need to help me take my environment, my solutions to the next level. So with that, I'm going to cover into myself, John Spallone. Live in Baltimore. I've been working in the industry now for 26 plus years, so I've earned the right to call myself a graybeard. I've done everything. I've been consultant. The only thing I hadn't done that actually came to thought this past week is I haven't done help desk. So too late in my career to start back again. Anyway, so I've done everything, and recently came from Citrix, where I handle global enablement as it relates to Citrix solutions and EUC in general in a cloud platform, public cloud approach. So that's where my sweet spot is that cloud ecosphere and how we bring these digital workspaces within the cloud side of the house. Skilled at dad jokes, not going to hit you off on one. I usually do about every other, so maybe next week you'll see one then. And then I have a Zen-like balance between my geekiness and my nerdiness. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Rick and Paul, who are here today with us. And again, guys, appreciate it. We've done a lot of these webinars with KeepIt. So I look forward to what we're going to talk about today.
Hey, John, thank you so much. Really appreciate the friendship, the partnership, and the introduction as well. So my part is going to be very, very brief. Again, I'm Rick Sloan. I head up the partnership here with KeepIt and XenTegra, the men of the hour that really are all here to listen to and to really see, as Paul Robichar, he's going to walk you through the KeepIt SaaS platform, what to better understand about your Microsoft and your SaaS applications, and how we're able to now bring this solution and continue to scale our business with over 3 million users, leveraging our SaaS platform globally, as well as probably over 2,000 of them as total customers. So without further ado, Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you, and it's your hour.
All right. Thanks very much, Rick. And thanks, John, again, for inviting us to be here. So I want to talk about shared responsibility. This is something that a lot of SaaS providers, I don't want to say it's a dirty little secret, because it's not a secret and it's not that dirty, really, by Vegas standards. But a lot of SaaS providers don't really want to talk about where the boundary is between what their responsibility is to protect your data and what they think your responsibility is. But you have to know that, right? It's absolutely a boundary issue, in the same way that you have to make rules with your neighbor about, who's allowed to go in the yard when. You have to have rules with your spouse. You have to have rules with your kids. Understanding what shared responsibility means to Microsoft is really critical in understanding how your data is protected and what you can and can't rely on with them. So a couple of quick words about me. I'm a developer, consultant. I've been a product manager for quite a while. I've been at KeepIt for a little bit over a year. I'm based in Huntsville, Alabama. I drink an awful lot of Diet Coke, probably more than is good for me. And I've been a Microsoft MVP in first Exchange on-prem and then Exchange online, and now Office Apps and Services since 2003. So I spent a lot of time thinking and talking about data protection in the Microsoft 365 world. Now, without turning this into a KeepIt commercial, I don't have a huge amount of time, and I want to make sure that we focus on the most important parts. KeepIt has a couple of unique advantages that we like to deploy with XenTegra to help their customers. One is we maintain our own network of private cloud data centers for keeping your backup. The reason why that's significant is we have no dependencies on Microsoft, on Amazon, on Google for storing and retrieving your backup data. So in the unlikely event that, meteors hit all 42 of Microsoft's worldwide Office 365 data center complexes, we can still let you log in and get your data and download it to your local machines and work with it. We have, as Rick said, just under 3 million protected mailboxes. We have added about 1.6 million protected Azure AD identities just since January, when we introduced our Azure AD backup connector. I could talk about the platform all day long, right? I'm not going to, although you're going to see me talk about some aspects of it. But I just want to put this out as a primer, because data protection in the cloud is what we do. Everything we do has been built from day one to be cloud native. So KeepIt's platform is not a retread platform that started on-prem where somebody decided, oh, let's have this on-prem server read some data from the cloud and then back it up somewhere on-prem. Everything we do is in the cloud, through the cloud, on the cloud. And that gives us some significant advantages when you think about speed, reliability, flexibility, and so on. And I think you'll get to see a little bit of that in the demo that I've got coming up in a few slides. So the two hard truths, let's just get it right out there. I came here to preach truth and chew bubble gum, and I don't have any more bubble gum. The first is that your cloud provider is not responsible for protecting your data. Okay, I want to say that again. Your cloud provider is not responsible for protecting your data. Microsoft will promise you that they will protect your data. And what they mean is they promise that they will not take all of your data and just wad it up into a ball and throw it away. They promise that they will not lose all of your data worldwide at the same time. And you can rely on them to keep that promise. And by the way, when I say Microsoft, I'm picking on them because we're in a Microsoft 365 centric world. But the same thing is true for all your other cloud providers. So if you're using Google Workspace, if you're using Salesforce, if you're using SAP HANA, the same thing is true. Okay, your provider is going to be responsible for not being incompetent and losing your data, but they are not responsible for protecting you in a number of important cases. So let's start with, you're responsible for keeping your data and your metadata safe and recoverable for these specific purposes. Microsoft is promising they won't lose everything across the table, but they're not promising that they can help you implement your disaster recovery plan. They're not promising that they can help you meet your compliance requirements. They are not promising anything about business continuity. They are just saying, hey, we're not going to lose all of your data at the same time in a way that prevents us from getting it back. So planning for RTOs and RPOs, implementing a business continuity plan that lets you get the right data back to the right people on the right platforms at the right time, that's not their problem, right? That's a you problem and not a Microsoft problem or Google problem. So we're going to talk a little bit about, what data you might have that might be valuable and how you know how valuable it is. And then talk about the real risks. That's going to involve some discussion of sharks because it's never a bad time to talk about sharks. Then we're going to talk about what Microsoft gives you if you, in the phrase we use, if you go naked. If you just use Microsoft's solution alone, you don't pay any money to anybody for any kind of data protection, retention, recovery, what are you actually protected against in that case? Because that's really, if I'm honest, that's KeepIt's biggest competitor. Our biggest competitor is not necessarily the companies that make software that does what our platform does. It's, well, what if I just don't buy anything? What if I take the defaults and I depend on Microsoft to give me some layer of protection? And then I want to talk about how you can make sure your cloud data is actually protected and secure. So is your data valuable? Well, short answer, yes. Now, how valuable it is and what specific data items are the most valuable is going to depend based on what you do. If you're a law firm, for example, your email and your SharePoint document data probably is more valuable than stuff that's shared in people's individual OneDrives, because you won't typically see law firms keeping work product in OneDrive because then it's limited to access by only one person unless it's shared. On the other hand, for a university or a school system, that OneDrive data may be much more valuable. There are probably systems that you use, even without thinking about them, that have really valuable data that you're not necessarily thinking about as being valuable per se. So I was thinking about this the other day because my wife works for the Army and she's migrating. She is moving from one branch of the civil service Army agency she works for to a different branch. And that means she has to get a completely new mailbox. So they don't just move her mailbox from one server to another. They're actually doing a cross-forest mailbox move, which is crazy when you think about it. But she has PSTs going back to pretty much the first day that she joined the Army 17 years ago. Now, you can make an argument that data is not really valuable to anybody but her. She doesn't really need, and the Army doesn't really need for her to be able to go back and pull out an email message from 2005 or 2006 and say, aha, now we know who the killer is, like in a Scooby-Doo episode. But for other businesses, that might not be the case. Okay, if you imagine that you're a business that deals in very long-term things like leases on commercial properties or leases on long-lived equipment or utilities. I saw we had a registrant from Huntsville Utilities. Since I'm based in Huntsville, big shout out. Huntsville Utilities does an excellent job. I worked on a project for a utility system in the Midwest a few years ago, and they had a requirement to keep detailed records of every utility pole that they had installed. Where was it? What was it made out of? Where did they buy it from? When was the last time it was inspected, and so on. And they had to keep that for 100 years. Okay. Now, in some ways, that really made their migration from drawers full of paper documents to SharePoint much more challenging because they had to build an architecture that would let them do that. But it's also true that part of that process was them deciding, okay, suppose someone goes in and they delete a particular record for that utility pole right over there, and then we need to get it back. How are we going to do that? Right? They're required to do that by NERC. They were required to do that by their state utilities commission. So that took quite a bit of thinking. And that's the kind of thing that I won't say it doesn't mean anything, but it'd be very different for an organization that's not in that same business. So you're the ones who have to decide what data items are the most important and where you want to keep them. Here I mentioned really three categories of things. You've got work in progress that people are working on. You've got individual work products that come from one person. How many of these you have and how valuable they are will absolutely depend on what your organization does for business. But it's also true that the workloads will vary in their importance. Email is a workload that people, how do I want to say this? Email is a workload that people most don't want to be without. In other words, people think, oh no, I need my email so I can work. Okay, fair enough. But in terms of the importance to the business, for a customer like the very large US retail bank we just started working with, the magic for them is not in the email that belongs to an individual branch manager or teller. The magic for them is in the very large SharePoint sites they have where they store all their documentation about everything. If they lose one of those and can't get that data back, that's a big compliance nightmare. It invites scrutiny from federal regulators from several different parts of the federal government. It just turns into a big nightmare scenario. So for them, SharePoint clearly outweighs the value of email, but every organization will be a little different. So we commissioned a study with ESG, and we can post a link or send a link to those of you who'd like to see it because it's well worth reading. And what you look at, what you see when you look at this particular slide is that when you look at the amount of downtime that people think is tolerable for what they define as their mission critical applications, 38% say it has to be less than 15 minutes, and 15% say no downtime ever, 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 ever. Okay. Well, we know that's not realistic. No application is with a very few exceptions, is ever going to have absolutely zero downtime ever. The best we can do is try to squeeze that margin of downtime as much as possible. Now, if you go all the way over to the right side, you see, okay, I've got 15% of customers that think 4 hours to 12 hours is okay. Somewhere in between is where most people are going to fall. So keep in mind, this RTO starts from the time you notice that there's a problem until the time the problem is corrected and the data you need is back where it's supposed to be. Now, I want to pivot for a second and talk about ransomware. This week, Rick and I are at the Gartner IOCS conference, which stands for IT Operations and Cloud Strategies. And I have heard more people talk about ransomware than I've heard them talk about gambling in Las Vegas. It is just crazy how pervasive as a concept ransomware is and how many people are thinking about it and worrying about it and trying to avoid it. So the bottom line is, data protection vendors like KeepIt, we can't do anything to help you avoid ransomware in the first place. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it. The trick is, how does what we do help prepare you for, if you get ransomware, being able to shrug it off and continue your operations? So when ESG studied data protection around ransomware, they found that 81% of the people they talked to had a need to recover data, but only 15% were able to get 100% of their data back. And out of that, you see this 25% section of the donut from malicious deletion refers to two things. It's ransomware or malware on one hand, and then bad administrators or disgruntled employees who go in and remove data. And that's why earlier I said Microsoft wants to promise you that they will never lose all of your data. It's true, But that's not really the threat that you face. Okay, when I talk about this kind of stuff in the room, I always like to ask for a show of hands of people who watch the Discovery Channel, and in particular, people who watch Shark Week. And I always get a lot of hands. Some people are really enthusiastic and proud. Some people are kind of like, yeah, I watch it. But the fact of the matter is that leads to a follow-up question, which is, what do you think puts you in the most danger when you're swimming in the ocean? If you ask Americans that, I would say over the last 20 years, you'd find 80+% of them will say that the biggest danger is marine life, mostly sharks. So you can thank the Discovery Channel for that mistaken belief. Because you know what kills people in the ocean? The water. Drowning will kill you. Getting swept away by a rogue wave will kill you. The sharks might kill you too, but the odds of a shark killing you are much lower by comparison. So when people worry about the data loss threats, they worry a lot about, oh my gosh, what if my cloud provider, somebody goes in and says, Dell star return, and that's just not a thing, right? That doesn't happen. The bigger threat that people don't think as much about is, what if I have an authorized insider who deletes a bunch of stuff using her authorized permissions? Or the worst case for me is, what if I accidentally delete something that I need? So, with that said, when you look at the impact of ransomware, I don't want to minimize and say ransomware doesn't happen, because it does. And it is a threat that you should take seriously. But contrast that against the threat of Microsoft losing your data. If you have a ransomware incident, Microsoft's responsibility to help you is absolutely nothing. If you go look at their actual ransomware recovery strategies document, it's called Microsoft's policy on human operated ransomware, and we can send the link for that too. It says the first step in your ransomware recovery is to recover from a known good backup. Okay, think about that for a second. Microsoft is telling you that the way they're going to tell you to recover is to go recover from a backup that they didn't make for you. They are not saying, oh, just call us and we'll put your data back. So in the ESG study, 73% of the people that they surveyed had been financially or operationally impacted, but only 1 in 7 who paid the ransom got all their data back. Okay, those are not good odds, even in Vegas. So this takes us back to the idea behind shared responsibility. So you can see here, these light blue squares in the chart show the things that Microsoft says they're responsible for. So check this out, applications. Microsoft is 100% responsible for making sure that Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Teams, etc., work when you need them. Now, that's good, because if you wanted to be responsible for them, you wouldn't be able to do anything about them. Those services operate behind the blue curtain, where you can't see them, you can't monitor them, you can't touch them. Okay. Physical hosts, yep, same thing. Physical data center, same thing. But look at these top 3 squares: information and data, devices, accounts, and identities. That is 100% on you, the human who is sitting listening to me talk. Microsoft Corporation and its subsidiaries and its employees, etc., have no responsibility to protect that data. Now, I want to be really clear that Microsoft also uses this model to talk about ownership of data. So they will be the first to say the reason information and data is up at the top of responsibility always retained by the customers is because Microsoft is never going to claim that they own your data or that they have rights to do anything with it except what you give them permission to. And I think that's a praiseworthy attitude for them to take, right? There are far too many companies that think, hey, if you post a picture on Instagram, we own it forever and we can do whatever we want with it. And Microsoft doesn't think that about your email. But it also means that at the end of the day, you personally and you organizationally are responsible for that. Now, you can look at Google, you can look at Salesforce, you can look at Zendesk, you could look at Azure, I always want to expand AWS to Azure Web Services. It tells you how sheep-dipped I am in Microsoft. Amazon Web Services. All of the cloud SaaS vendors have got exact shared responsibility policies that follow this same general trend. There may be individual differences in some places, but in general, what they're promising is, we promise that we will not take all of our data centers and dump them into the ocean or purposefully throw away all of your data. That's as far as the promise goes. So that leads to the question, okay, hey, Paul, man, thank you for pointing this out. I didn't know I was responsible for protecting my own data. I thought naively that because I was paying Microsoft thousands of dollars a month that they were going to handle this for me. Now that I know they're not, I can just go naked, right? I can use the recovery features or protection features that are already built into the service, and I'll still be good. Short answer, no. So if you look at the primary recovery features that Microsoft has got, and notice I'm not talking about the native data protection features. So for those of you who have been around Exchange for a while, you might remember that Microsoft came up with this idea of native data protection to mean that you could build an Exchange infrastructure that would already have multiple redundant copies of your mailboxes. You could do that in a database availability group. And then you could have multiple database copies in that DAG. And then you could do other funny things with shadow copies of mailboxes or snapshots through a SAN vendor or whatever. Okay, that was the phrase native data protection is supposed to imply that the application or some layer below you, the administrator, is protecting that data from being lost in the first place. It's not a recovery mechanism. Okay, please don't misunderstand and think that Microsoft has got armies of people on roller skating around their data center, changing LTO backup tapes because they make tape backups of your data, because they don't. So what Microsoft talks about as backup and recovery features are limited to really these three categories. So we've got litigation hold, and those of you who have used it know that it is a data preservation tool more than it is a data recovery tool. It costs you money, it's a pain, and in general, the people who have the permission to do litigation hold stuff and the people who need to be able to recover data for backup or restoration purposes are not usually the same people. The other thing is, you're going to probably find, and we certainly find this with many of our customers, there is an organizational allergy to putting everything on litigation hold, because that means it's legally discoverable. Intel is a great example of this. They have an extremely aggressive data destruction policy where they retain as little as possible. That's because they have been sued so many times. And every time they get sued, opposing counsel forces them to produce relevant documents. If you don't keep the documents, you can't be compelled to produce them. So putting stuff on litigation hold means you have just opened up a library for the people who sue you to riffle through to look for things, and not every company is comfortable doing that. So that brings us to versioning. I love versioning. I couldn't do the work I do without the ability to go back to a previous version of a document or to have co-editing in Office 365, which is enabled by the underlying versioning layers. But the trick to keep in mind here is that this only applies to documents, number one. So there's no versioning for Power BI reports. There's no versioning for Teams channels or Teams chats. But what there is a way for you to go back and say, okay, I had a document, and on Monday, the document was good to go. And on Tuesday, I got ransomwared, and now that document is encrypted. Well, I could just roll back to the Monday version, right? That's the promise behind versioning. As a practical matter, versioning is way better as an oops recovery tool for oops. I had a document open and the cat walked across the keyboard while I had some text selected and it vanished, right? Which is a real thing that my cat has done multiple times because he's a cat. It's way more useful for that than it is for ransomware recovery, because the ransomware could just fill up the version store. Microsoft only allows you to have a set number of document versions before they overwrite the oldest version with the newest one. And then, oops, now you have 100 encrypted versions of a document instead of a document that has one version encrypted and 99 versions that are not. Of course, versioning doesn't apply to email. It doesn't apply to folders or structures. It doesn't apply to SharePoint sites. It doesn't apply to the term store. There's a very long list of things that aren't versioned. So the versioning really only protects, Word, Excel, PowerPoint documents, which is certainly better than nothing, but it's not perfect by itself. Now let's talk about the recycle bin. This was revolutionary when Microsoft introduced it. The idea that you could go in and grab a file out of the recycle bin and restore it and have it be like it was never deleted was magic. Those of you who've had to run like undelete tools in DOS or early versions of Windows know what I mean. But when you think about the practical limitations, the recycle bin concept throughout all of the services where Microsoft offers it is hampered by a couple things. One is it's not offered everywhere. So if I go into the Azure AD portal and I delete a conditional access policy, that policy is as gone as the $20 I just wasted at the blackjack table. You're not getting it back because there's no recycle bin for that object. There are recycle bins for some types of user objects, for email, some Teams items, OneDrive and SharePoint. The second problem with recycle bins is that when they exist, they always have time limits. Okay, if you want a recycle bin with unlimited time, then that's what litigation hold is for. So in between those, Exchange is going to give you 30 days by default. Teams is going to give you 30 days by default. OneDrive is going to give you 93 days by default, or sooner in all these cases, really, if the user empties their recycle bin. So recycle bin technology in general is a nice way to catch yourself if you delete something and then realize that you needed it and shouldn't have deleted it, assuming that you realize it in time. I saw a news story the other day about a guy who was cleaning up in the kitchen and accidentally threw out his wife's wedding ring and then had to sort through 20 tons of garbage to find it again. And luckily he did, right? That would be extremely difficult to come back from if you said, oh, sorry, honey, I threw away your wedding ring. But most of us are not going to get that kind of dramatic benefit out of the recycle bin technology that Microsoft offers. So when you think about, okay, well, if I have these recycle bins, gosh, I better figure out what I am able to actually do with them and what I can recover and then document it and then train people so they understand those limitations. I wish you all the best with that. That is absolutely what everybody should do. But that approach has some limitations. One is Microsoft can always change the way parts of the system work, and they do that all the time. Another is you're making some assumptions in using these mechanisms that the users will behave in the way that you think they will. If you've ever met somebody who thinks that the real shortcut to delete mail in Outlook is Shift Delete, then you'll know what I mean. Right? Because when you do that, that message is hard deleted and then it's not recoverable. And some people have been trained or taught or just figured out on their own that that's what they want to do. And so before you start to depend on going without any additional protection, it's probably a good idea to test and see if I had to do a recovery right now, if my CIO walked in here and said, gosh, I just deleted this important message and I really need to get it back. Or, hey, I realized I just got back from 2 weeks of vacation and I realized I deleted something before I left that I need for a board meeting. Can you help me get it back? Be a really good idea to test and see what you actually can recover in those different scenarios. So some best practices. I don't usually like to use the term best practices because it sounds judgy. Like if you're doing something that's not best, what are those loser practices? But there are some, I think, objectively better practices that we can talk about when it comes to backup and recovery for Microsoft and their workloads. So the accepted standard for backups is 3-2-1. It has been this way since mainframe days. Okay, I'm old. I was around then. And so I know this. 3 copies of your data, 1 primary copy that's your live production copy, and 2 backups. The 2 backups should be on 2 different media sets, and one of those should be offline and immutable. Are you doing that right now? If you're not, then ask yourself why you're not doing it and what it would change about your disaster recovery planning and your ability to hit RTOs and RPOs if you started doing it. So first best practice is make sure that your backup plan delivers this. If you don't have immutable copies of your backups, then you are playing an extremely dangerous and risky game with the amount of ransomware that's floating out around there. So I mentioned earlier that Microsoft recommends backup. You could see this step 1 with a big green arrow is verify your backups. Okay. Now really step 0 is first you have to get the ransomware out of your network. That's a completely separate topic. XenTegra has experts who can help you plan for what you're going to do around EDR, what you're going to do around endpoint security, and so forth. What I can tell you is once your network is clean and you want to start putting stuff back, even Microsoft will tell you that the number 1 thing to do is check your backups and then start using them to restore. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just show you a quick demo, and that's because of Zoom. It's going to require me to quit sharing and then reshare. But I'm going to show you what KeepIt's platform actually looks like and walk you through a scenario where we show a delete and then a restore, just to prove that this is as easy as I say it is. So first, that's going to require me to go find the password because our security timer logged me out while I was, well, excuse me, while I was doing my presentation. So bear with me for 1 second. John, I don't know if we have any questions that we want to cover while I'm digging up this password in the bowels of Teams.
Nothing yet.
Okay, I keep telling Teams to open this in chat, and it won't.
So I'll jump in here temporarily while you work on that password. A lot of what you'll see now in the demo, excuse me, that Paul will go through is a good little quick snippet, I'll use the term, where you'll see the concept behind what we do, how we do it. It's really around the ease of use, the intelligent search engine, where you can accidentally spell a word wrong. You may type in Azure AA instead of Azure AD. It'll still find the results for you. And so you'll see the dashboard. I'll go back over to Paul here at this point and let him walk you through.
Well,
Yeah, thanks for that.
Real quick, Paul, before you jump in, we did have one question pop up, and it's basically, what's the best way to save stuff online? So I think that's pretty general, but I think you hit on that as far as how KeepIt works within this.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So I mentioned earlier, what we think is the best way, and what I think you can really defend as a real best practice is, first of all, we keep your data in our own data centers. So it's not in the same data centers as the source of that data, which means that if Godzilla ever did attack US East 2 or Sydney or Qatar or wherever else your data is homed in Microsoft's network, that same attack is not going to impact the data that you hold at KeepIt. So I guess the first answer to where's the best way to save stuff online is not in the same place that your primary data is. The second, best way or best place to save it is somewhere where it's immutable. So I didn't talk about this on purpose, just because it's a kind of a time-consuming concept to work through. But we use a construct called Merkle trees to store data immutably. And the way to think about that is it's a combination of two things. One is an append-only file system. So every time we add data to your backup and KeepIt, we're adding it as an incremental. You can think of this like a permanent incremental system, where we never go back and overwrite or remove or do anything to previous incremental slices. We're always adding the latest changes on the end. The way that we preserve immutability is by chaining hashes together. So if you think of what a cryptographic hash is for, every incremental object that we're going to preserve, we can calculate a hash for, and we can use that hash to chain to the previous version of that object or the previous version of the incremental. And what that lets us do is verify that none of the data from the original, and let's talk about a file as an example. So I back up a file and I calculate its hash, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then Rick goes in and co-edits the file and he saves it to my OneDrive, and I back it up again. And now the hash is 6, 7, 8, 9. I can combine those two hashes and generate a new third hash, A, B, C, D, E. And what that lets me do is, if I look at the original file or if I look at the new file, in both cases, I can calculate whether those files have the correct hash that lets me get back to A, B, C, D, E. If either of those versions have been changed, then I know that that part of the file or that part of the chain has been tampered with, and I can disregard it or I can flag it as, hey, this is bad, something is contaminated. So there's no way for an attacker to go into the KeepIt system and overwrite data that we've previously written, because all we ever do is add new data on the end. There's no way for an attacker to go in and delete data that we previously backed up. So you'll sometimes hear that ransomware attackers that attack on-prem systems will come in and they will attack a on-premises backup system that's making snapshot copies of something like a VMware host. Right, it's a very common configuration. And the problem there is if the attacker can encrypt your backups and your production system, you might as well not have any backups. And then Siri was joining in. Hopefully none of you heard that. But the advantage that we have is attackers can't do that. There's no way for them to get in, overwrite the data that we've, or ransomware or encrypt the data that we've previously provided or captured for you. So what this looks like in practice, you're looking at the KeepIt dashboard, and you can see over here in the left column, we have a bunch of connectors that show different things. So the first thing I'm going to do, actually, if I can find it, so I'm going to switch over here. This is Megan Bowen, the very well-known Microsoft demo account that I think everybody uses all the time. And you'll see Megan's enrolled in getting some weekly mail from the Azure AD identity protection team and some Viva stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select her mail from this month, essentially. And I'm going to delete it. Okay, so you can see now the first message I've got in her mailbox is on 11/22. And if I go to her deleted items folder, I see the messages there, but just to make this marginally more interesting. Okay, now she didn't have anything in deleted items. So you might think, hey, wait a minute, Megan's data is gone. But what I can do here, as Rick pointed out earlier, is I can open up this connector. And then I can get her data back. So let's do that. Now when I look here, what I'm going to see is groups and teams, public folders, SharePoint, and users. So I now want to back up some of Megan's data. So when I come here and I pick Megan, I can see the different categories of her data that I backed up. And of course, what I'm interested in is her mail, and more particularly mail in her inbox. So I can sort this by date and see that I sorted it backwards. So I'm going back to 2021. So let me reverse that. Okay. Here are some messages from this month. So now what I'm going to do is restore them. I get a warning, and this is a little disconcerting because when you see this red, you might think, oh my gosh, what's going on? Because we restore this data in place by default, we're giving you a chance to say, oh, no, wait a minute. I just wanted to look at this data. So one thing I haven't even touched on, you don't have to restore the data back to its original location. I could take Megan's data. I could restore it to a PST file. I could download it directly to my admin workstation, or as I'll show you in a minute, I could create a link that I could send directly to Megan and let her do her own restore of that data onto her own device. This is really important from a service perspective, because if you think about the scenario I outlined at the beginning of the presentation, when, oh my gosh, what if Microsoft loses everything? Let's say that Microsoft has had some kind of outage, or I have had some kind of outage. And what I really need is I need Megan to be able to go find one critical message that she got from a client so she can get a deal moving with that client. I don't need to restore all 50 gigabytes of her mail to do that. I really only need that one message. So I can pick out just that one message and send her a link to let her access it directly without touching any Microsoft systems. She can open that link and preview the message herself. And I'll show you what the preview looks like. Okay, you can see as I look through the items in Megan's mailbox, before I restore, I can always use this preview to tell, am I about to restore the right message? But also if Megan said, hey, I really need to know the name of that guy that we took to the customer dinner. Was his name Frank or Fred? Well, I could send her a link and let her go look at her backed up items and let her figure that out for herself, right? So the ability to quickly look at a message or set of messages. And then, as I said, I can create a public link and then share it, including some restrictions on how long the link is valid or whether it's password protected. Now I can copy this link. I could send that to Megan with WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. I can scribble it on a whiteboard in her office, and she can log directly in and get that data back without having to get it out of her mailbox. So meanwhile, while I've been blathering on, Okay, you'll see that Megan's item restore was successful. And now if I go back here, you'll see, okay, here's the message from this morning. Here's the message from yesterday. Here are the other two messages that I restored. And notice her deleted items is still empty because I deleted the original copies of those messages, but I just brought them back with full fidelity. So all the images, all the metadata that makes that makes Exchange Online aware that this message is just for Megan is still here. All of these links work. Everything is as it was before the deletion. So we focus a lot of attention and effort on putting things back the way they were. Not just to restore the data, but to restore a user's ability to work and get stuff done the same way that she could before the disaster, before the problem occurred. So let me flip back, and I've got a couple more slides in closing. Starting with that ever popular question, what do I do now? So what you should do now is you should immediately, as soon as this webinar is over, you should call John and tell him you want some of this KeepIt goodness, and can XenTegra please help you? I'm only partly kidding. Slightly more seriously, all right, take an honest look at what potential losses you might face if you didn't have the data you need when you need it. I know all of you have done this, right? I mean, this is a fundamental part of IT operational life at every organization that has more than 2 or 3 users. But have you done it lately? Has it changed? Have there been changes in your business? Have there been changes in the working world? I know there have been changes in my working world because now I have colleagues that I don't physically see because COVID, right? Now, it's certainly not as bad as it was 2 years ago, but many of those people like not traveling, and they're not going to start traveling again. So the way I interact with them through the computer and the way that I share documents and information with them over Microsoft 365 instead of in a physical office or with a physical whiteboard, that's not going away. And if that's true for you, then maybe you haven't gone through to reevaluate your DR planning and your BC planning to make sure that the plans you have are in sync with the way your business actually operates in 2022 going into 2023. So the next thing to do is think very clearly about the risks that you actually face. Don't worry about the shark. Worry about, do I know how to swim? Is there a lifeguard on the beach? What are the surf conditions? Then worry about sharks, right? If you're swimming in Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans, sharks are not going to be your problem. There are no sharks there. You're going to have other potential problems like getting run over by a boat or swallowing water that's been polluted. And so you have to think about the risks in context of the risks that your individual organization faces, not just the generic ones that I tell you about or that Microsoft tells you about or that you hear about on CNN. After you do these two things, if you still think, okay, I've got some data and it is valuable enough to worry about protecting, that's when you need to bring in a trusted partner and start talking to them about, okay, how can I protect these specific crown jewels that are most important to me? So keep in mind, Microsoft only protects your data so far. It's your data. You need to protect it. And that's all I have to say about that. So John, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, let you bring it back. And then if we've got any other questions, we can move into a vigorous Q&A.
Sure thing, Ed. So basically what you're telling us is don't be a Fonzie, don't jump the shark.
Okay, not only is that a dad joke, but that's a historical reference that I hope everybody on the call actually got.
Yeah, again, I'm old. All right, so we don't have any questions that have popped up. So I just also want to state that, just like the Hair Club for Men, not only, are we a proprietor of KeepIt, but we also are a user. So we have it in-house as well that we utilize KeepIt as our own solution. So it's not something that we're just out there preaching. And I hate this phrase, but we eat our own dog food. But that's the case.
Wow,
so,
that hurt, man.
Yeah, I don't like that phrase. I don't know what it is. There was another one that always came out was don't throw the baby out with the sink water or bath water or whatever. It's another one. I was just like, okay. We do have from Deb Turner. She said that if she can recall, KeepIt was recognized in 2021 for being a leader in terms of backups based on Forrester ratings. Are you still recognized in Gartner or Forrester?
Yeah, so Gartner has mentioned us. There's a tricky little trick with the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and it's a dirty secret. It's not all that little. There is a certain minimum revenue size that you have to be eligible to be considered in a Magic Quadrant. Tonight, in fact, our lead attorney and one of our two co-founders is taking the Gartner guy who owns the Magic Quadrant for enterprise backup and recovery to dinner to have a full and frank exchange of views with him about that, because we don't think that's a fair restriction. I think, and admittedly I'm biased, but the reason we're not in the Magic Quadrant is only because we don't yet sell enough product to hit their arbitrary revenue target, which is unique to this area. There are other Magic Quadrants where the revenue target is low enough and we would be included. So don't, how do I want to say this? Don't take my word for it. I'd love to sit down and do a demo of the product. I only scratch the surface of what it can do and how easy it is to use, but also what good protection it provides. And I think, as you get to know more about the product, you'll see why Gartner would be Magic Quadranting us if we were just a little bit bigger.
Yeah. Hey, John, can I chime in on this one as well?
Sure.
So real quick, so 2 points. One, staying on the Gartner path as well. They do recognize us. Their analysts do recommend the KeepIt solution out in the marketplace. We've had many companies that have come to us when we've asked the question, how did you hear about KeepIt? Their response is, oh, the Gartner analyst has recommended that we look at you. You've been that disruptor in the industry, the way you go about your methodology, the security and the ease of use. It helps bring a lot to the forefront. And the other piece you mentioned about Forrester, we had recently a total economic report that was created by Forrester. Some of the highlights that Paul didn't necessarily go through are really highlighted in this total economic impact report, where you take the technology, you take the foundation, and then how do you bring it in to be able to talk to your CFO to even justify how do you go to market and how do you fit into the budget? That has to do with some of the features that we offer where we don't charge for departed users. And so many organizations out there, and looking at the names that are here, organizations have about 10 to 15% turnover per year. If you look at that percentage of how much turnover you have per year, we don't charge for your departed users. We'll continue to store your departed user data for free for as long as you have set the retention policy for. You then get to reuse that license with your new hires. You then also take that into account. We don't charge for shared mailboxes. Now, Microsoft doesn't require a license. We don't require a license. Where that exception may come in is over 50 gig in a mailbox. They require a license. You'll need one with us. But we actually help save a lot of organizations when they have a departed user, be able to remove their Microsoft license immediately rather than keeping that license going for a couple of months at maybe $50 a month per user. You start looking at that. That's the whole concept between the Forrester Total Economic Impact report that was created.
And then one other question popped up of packaging offers from KeepIt.
So we have a unique way that we come to market. We've simplified the complexity. Again, this kind of comes back to some of our features. We look at the number of users. With our enterprise unlimited licenses, we look at the number of users within your system. That's what your charge is. It's based on an annual or multi-year agreement. Pricing can come through XenTegra, and really your variable is how many solutions do you need for your SaaS applications and what's the length of time. With the enterprise unlimited license, you get unlimited retention. We define that up to 99 years based on your company's policy. You set it between 30 days to 99 years for each connector. We also include unlimited storage. So we don't look and have you worry about how many users do I have at what category. It really simplifies coming on board, and being able to also have that turnover and be able to keep consistent forecasts of what your expense model would be.
Great. Thanks, Rick.
Sure.
Any other questions while we're on this? Okay, looks like we're cleared up on this. And also, you know, we're just so you know, we're always here to answer your questions. So if something pops up afterwards, please feel free to follow up with us. We'll help you out with that. It's not like, oh, this is the only time I get to answer a question and that's it. So we're always available to answer any type of questions that are out there. So some quick housekeeping. December, it's here, yay, end of the calendar year. So we've only got one more webinar this year, Remo 3 on 12/14. I won't be closing out the year. Sorry, guys. Workshops, boot camps. We have app layering done right with Liquidware on 12/13 at 1:30, and Nutanix Error Technology Boot Camp, which will be on 12/16 at 11 a.m. The down on the right-hand side, left-hand side, whatever side, down in the corner there where you see the QR code, that will take you to the landing page for the events. So you can check out anything that'll be coming up. We have planned for Q1, so you will see that coming up pretty soon here for our webinars that we have coming up. And reminder that there's the giveaway that will be drawn afterwards. Then you'll be notified from KeepIt as far as you're the winner or not. So be patient. I know both Rick and Paul are out there in Vegas, so they will be following up with you on that once the drawing's completed. Also, work has no boundaries. Enter in for the Ford Bronco. That's where I was saying earlier, this is an opportunity where if you want to dig in a little bit deeper, you know, look at some piloting, look at some additional information with XenTegra and Keep It Together that helps fulfill requirements that you would need to enter in for this. So please feel free, reach out. Again, QR code takes you to the website. You can get to it from the XenTegra.com website, all that kind of neat stuff. We just have our own FQDN for this contest. So if you feeling lucky, go ahead and try to jump in and win yourself a Bronco. With that, I want to thank everybody for being here. One last thing to point out. This QR code takes you to the YouTube page for XenTegra, where we have all of our webinars, podcasts, everything media-wise that we've done that has some type of video recording is out there on the YouTube page. So feel free, QR it. You can check out a lot of stuff, a lot of playlists that we have for the webinars podcast based upon technologies, categories, all that kind of neat stuff. But with that said, like I said, I want to thank you, Paul and Rick, both taking your time out of Vegas to be here with us today. I know the time difference there, it's not fun. I actually had to do that for last week's webinar, so I know how it goes, guys. And thank you everybody else for being here, and we will see you next Wednesday, and I wish everybody a great 2023.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming, everybody.
Thank you.